In this tutorial, we're going to talk about some of the things that you'll need to know to work with sound in After Effects. I think that this is a pretty important tutorial at the beginning of your introduction to After Effects because sound works sort of inherently differently inside After Effects than it does in other video editing programs. So there's a couple things that you'll probably want to know and a couple tricks for understanding the workflow a little bit better. Right now I have a composition here called Shapes, and inside my project window I have an AIFF file, and this file is called 3 Red Lights. When I click on it, you can see that up here in the Project tab we get a little thumbnail of our audio waveform. I've dragged it down into my timeline, and you can see it over here on the time graph. And you can see it's an audio file because we have this little icon here. If I want to mute the file, I can click here, and then the file is still present in the composition but not audible. If I want to see my waveform, I can click on the little spin down arrow here, and then here, and I can see the waveform of the original file. If I want to increase the volume level of the file, sort of across the board, if I move my mouse over here, you can click and drag to the right, and then as I raise it, and you can see I've raised it 11 relative decibel points, we can see the waveform gets louder over here. You can do this in different portions with keyframing over time. I would say that this is something that is useful at times. I enjoy the visual preview as well, sort of letting you know that they're amping up the waveform a little bit more than before. If I hit the spacebar to play, can see the playhead moves along, and then our star appears and our circle appears, but I'm not hearing any of the audio. And you can see we're looping the playback within that work area there. Now the reason that I can't hear the audio is because After Effects isn't going to basically waste any of its time or resources rendering out an audio file if you don't need to hear it. So you have to request that it specifically play the audio for you. So there's a couple ways to do that. If I want to do a RAM preview, you can see that we've got a little button over here in the preview window. If I click on that, and it's going to loop back and forth, or it's going to loop over and over again in my work area, the green indicating that we've got that, that preview going on. If I don't want to loop, I can click here, and then we've got a ping pong option. So if we do the RAM preview, you'll see the difference there. Then it will play backwards. It's not going to play the audio backwards, but you see the visual backwards, and then it's going to play through with the audio again. The next option on our RAM preview is just to play once. And then you're done. So a couple different choices there. Usually the looping option is the one that I prefer to work with, just because I like to see things a couple of times and make sure I've made the right decision. But again, if I just press play, we'll get the visual but not the audio. If I want to hear what the audio sounds like, I can press the decimal key on my keypad. And this is if I'm working with a full keyboard that has the QWERTY keys and a numeric keypad. If I press the decimal point, you can see that now we're playing through the song, and we can hear it as we're watching that playhead move. If I hit the 0 key, I'm going to get a RAM preview. And again, this is for our numeric keypad. Now, if you're working on a laptop, those keyboard shortcuts are not going to work exactly the same way. You'll need to either remap the keyboard shortcut to a different key. Sometimes people use the tab key on their keypad to make that happen, or you can use the function key in combination with the period key for playing the audio, or I believe it's M if you want to do the RAM preview. But so a couple things there. The other element that we want to show you is that if you want to scrub through the timeline and basically hear what's happening as you're dragging the playhead along, you have to hold down on the Command key. So if I hit the Command key and I click and drag, you can hear the sound of the audio scrubbing. So sometimes you want to just kind of like hunt and find a spot, and other times you don't need that function. The other thing that you can do to preview is if you hold down on the Command key and you hold down on top of the playhead, it will cycle through a small portion of the timeline, and it's basically to help you figure out if you're in the right spot. If you're working on something as precise as, say, a kinetic typography piece, this is really helpful. And again, this work area, you can pick it up and move it over. So if I wanted to get a RAM preview, and we'll just bring these over as well for some visuals. If I wanted to get a RAM preview, I just have to move that work area. So hopefully you can see where that work area starts to get really useful when you're creating these preview versions of your pieces of your project. Now the last thing that I want to talk about in terms of working with audio and just sort of the beginning steps of working with audio is in the output of your After Effects file. If I wanted to create this as a sort of separate movie file, if I wanted to export it so that I could play it on a different computer or attach it to a different movie project, the way that I would want to do that is to add the composition to my render queue. So if I click here, you can see the render queue pops up behind my shapes in the timeline, and we'll talk more about outputting at a different time, but just give you this sort of handy tip. If I click on lossless, you can see that we get an output module settings option, and down here you can see my audio output is not selected. And so 9 times out of 10, if you're new to After Effects and you export your file, you're going to forget this step, and then you don't have audio in your file, and you're wondering about why it's not working. And if you've ever rendered anything in After Effects, you know it certainly takes sometimes a substantial amount of time, so you want to make sure to get all of the right buttons checked at the beginning. So you want to make sure this is clicked, and then that way After Effects will go to the trouble of including the audio in your composition. So you can see that it does have to be adjusted for custom modification there.